Josh, are you ready?
Sure. It's good to know that you're training the next generation of journalists and the important
with
like
alcohol.
liquor.
Yeah. Josh Benton is the director of Nieman Lab. NiemanLab.org, which if you don't know it, is a site about the future of journalism. Is very much sort of a sister, a kinship with Studio 20, because what you see on Nieman Lab is what we teach and what we hope our students will assimilate. So even before they come to their first class, Josh, you may not know this, I tell them that they have to read Nieman Lab and follow Nieman Lab, because what we do is so simpatico. So that's why we invite Josh every year here to give his slideshow on innovation in journalism. And with that, Josh, you're ready, I assume?
I am.
Take it away.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for having me here again. At the risk of starting off with a little TMI, I mentioned this last year, but 2 years ago, the first time I was asked to give this talk, that evening, my son was conceived. So I feel an obligation now to provide an update every year that I come back. So this was young Dashiell last year, about 3 months old. You can do the math, 9 months, 3 months, it all works out. I won't show you the horrifying image I showed last year of a baby's body with Jay's head on it, which was just felt wrong in some fundamental way. This is Dash today. His name is Dashiell, so we had to get him in an Incredibles outfit while he still had no control over the situation for Halloween. So this is Dashiell's year in innovation. He's really walking and running around. I mean, he's innovated a lot in the past 12 months. No, we'll do just the year in innovation. So I'm just going to run through a number of things that we saw at Nieman Lab that we thought were important this year. Some of them are well known. Some of them maybe a little bit less so. And just sort of start with the biggest item and work our way through. I don't think there was a bigger story this year than the distributed content revolution. Revolution may be putting a little bit too much weight on it, but it's pretty darn close. It's one of the biggest phenomenon to happen to the online media business in the past 5, 6, 7 years. Distributed content, for those who may not be familiar with the word, is the idea of instead of publishing your content on your own platform, your own website, the New York Times publishing to nytimes.com, to publishing to a New York Times app. Instead, it's the idea that in addition, the New York Times would be publishing content directly into Facebook, directly into Apple News, directly into Snapchat Discover, creating content that takes advantage of the fact that these platforms, social platforms, and we mostly mean Facebook here, but some others as well, have such an enormous share of human attention. So this is Instant Articles, which was announced at the beginning of this year and launched around in early summer, and just this past week finally reached all iPhone and Android users. Apple News was announced earlier this year, the idea that Apple would have its own dedicated app that would pull in information from lots and lots of major publishers. Snapchat Discover also arrived in 2015. I'm just curious, just to raise your hand if you use Snapchat on a regular basis. All right. Raise your hand if you're really excited about using Snapchat on a regular basis. Snapchat, I must confess, I'm 40. This is the first time I really feel like, oh, I'm too old for this job. Snapchat Discovery has these publishers through a business arrangement with Snapchat, publishing Snapchat prepared content formatted for the app, just to the exclusive audience of all of your younger friends. Now, why is this significant? You know, Facebook in particular has an enormous amount of control over the traffic that news online gets today. There are lots of news organizations, and most news organizations, I would wager, get at least 30% or so of their traffic directly from Facebook. Many news organizations get the majority of their traffic from Facebook. When Facebook is adjusting the dials of the news feed and its algorithm a little bit to the right and pushing lots more traffic there that way, as they did in 2014, it's a wonderful thing. Everyone hits their numbers. This year, Facebook has sort of dialed back the spigot a little bit. And the fact that Facebook is sort of able to do this in this completely opaque way was both a very frustrating thing for publishers, but also a sign that maybe we need to work with this Goliath in a more direct way. Facebook, through Instant Articles and through Facebook Video this year, was very interested in taking content out that was previously on the open web, on YouTube or on a publisher's website, and pulling it directly inside Facebook. You can certainly understand why Facebook would be interested in that. The debate that's been going on in lots of publishers' offices is it in their interest as well to do the same. So why is this important? This chart is one big part of it. Google and Facebook, two companies, this is 2014 data, an estimate, global mobile advertising revenue, so every ad on every phone outside of China, Google and Facebook together control 70% of it in the entire world, two companies. Every publisher that you know is in that last slice of 29%, and most of them would not fill up a single pixel, of course. This is really the challenge. One thing that we're publishing on Nieman Lab this week, I hope you get a chance to check it out, our predictions for 2016 series, as we do every December. And Aaron Pettigrew, who was until recently the chief strategy officer at Gawker Media, wrote something smart today that said, online media companies used to think of traditional media companies as their main competition. Now they're being forced to realize that technology companies are their main competition. And outsmarting the Des Moines Register is a different question than outsmarting Facebook, or outcompeting, I should say. So why is this happening? Well, there are a variety of reasons. Platforms have realized their power and are choosing to act on it. They're offering revenue sharing deals where Facebook or Apple or Snapchat will keep only 30% of the ad revenue along the way if they sell the ad. They'll let the company keep 100% otherwise. But a big issue is web performance. Mobile sites are so bad, so slow, so janky, so filled with data and trackers that there is a real desire to escape that to a very comfortable walled garden. And I think Facebook and Apple and others are really taking advantage of that somewhat accurate perception. So who's going to benefit from distributed content? Who wins in this era? This was a quote that I thought was quite telling from Michael Finnegan, who works at Atlantic Media. Let's say we reach 35 to 40 million people now through our owned and operated sites today. That would include the Atlantic, Quartz, and others. 5 years from now, our brands could be reaching 300 million or 500 million people worldwide. But they can't do that if you expect them all to go to theatlantic.com. You need to take advantage of these platforms with enormous scale. That's the future I see. Some of us are running towards it faster than others. The real question there is, so that's great for Atlantic Media. Where does the Des Moines Register fit in? Where does the Shreveport Times fit in? Where does local news fit into this platform? The one great advantage of distributed content is this access to scale, but if you're producing local news, your potential scale is pretty limited unless you happen to get video of someone falling in an interesting way and it goes viral. This is, I think, still really an open question about the impact this is going to have on publishers, but it was without a doubt the story of 2015 because it is both a marker and an amplifier of the loss of direct connection that publishers have to their audiences. Social platforms and other platforms have gotten in the way in ways that offer many benefits, but also bleed a lot of the power that publishers used to have away. Now, really related to that was the rise of ad blockers. Madeline, who we loved having here at Nieman Lab this summer and working with her this fall, talked about the ad blocking event we had right here on the stage. I was seated right about here, I think. Ad blockers are not not new. They've been around on desktop machines for quite a number of years. But with Apple's announcement, it would be allowed on the iPhone for the first time. There was this real fear that mobile, which was already a platform that publishers were doing a terrible job of making money off of, was about to have one of its relatively few monetization options, perhaps pulled out from underneath it. Ad blocking is a really tough question. It's a tough question, from a moral perspective. It's a tough question from a strategy perspective, from a monetization perspective. Is it okay to block the ads on a publisher's site? A whole lot of people think it is. I'm not going to agree or disagree with that. What we do find, though, is that generally speaking, the worst behavior of publishers ends up punishing even the best behavior of publishers. What most people do, even though ad blockers do have whitelists that you can customize and say, I like the Washington Post, I want to see their ads. For the most part, people just install an ad blocker and never see an ad again. So whether your ads are, tracking user behavior or flashing and taking over your screen or crashing your iPhone, or whether they're perfectly acceptable ads. Some technology-oriented sites already have the majority of their users using ad blockers. I talked to a gentleman who is the CTO of a major pop culture site that you know the name of, said that over 30% of their users are using ad blockers. It seems like the number around of average about now for major publishers around 12 to 15% of their readers are using ad blockers. So that's 12 to 15% of the ad impressions that they can no longer sell. So what are the options? What can publishers do? There seem to be four that people have coalesced around. First is do nothing. Seems to be the most common response. Just accept this. The second is to try to guilt people. Like if you have an ad blocker and you go to The Guardian, you'll see a little message saying, "We see that you have an ad blocker on." Don't you think Guardian journalism is worth supporting? Don't you feel like you would perhaps like to be a member of The Guardian through this wonderful membership program we have? Variations on guilting, or just saying, please whitelist us. Don't you value the content we produce? A third option is to try and break the blockers. There are a number of services. We had one on the panel the other week from Secret Media that will sell to publishers tools to disguise their ads so the ads show up anyway. Ha 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 ha. Some folks have taken on that strategy. And the last one is really to just block the content. I think if anyone has been a success, it's been the German paper Bild, which has a strategy, which was finding that they were having over 40% of their users blocking ads. They decided that they were going to not let you read the article if you were blocking ads. Instead, if you click on a link and you go see the article, you get a notification that says, sorry, you can't read this article if you have your ad blocker on. You have two choices. You can either whitelist us in your ad blocker, or you can pay for a relatively cheap ad-free subscription to our site. And they found that in doing that, they now have about 3 million new page views per week that they're able to sell ads on that they weren't before. Now, the real fear with ad blocking is mobile, the degree to which it's going to become a mainstream behavior. The numbers that we saw in reporting out before the panel were usually around 1 to 3% of mobile users at most news sites seem to be using ad blockers on their iPhones. But remember that only applies to the share of people who are using the Safari browser on the iPhone. If you're reading a news page inside Facebook, for example, you're not included in that. So it's a bigger number than that. Along the same theme of new intermediaries coming in, offering a better user experience and disrupting business models, I feel like this was a year where we took some more serious steps towards over-the-top television. I'm an old newspaper guy. That was my career before Nieman Lab. And I always felt very jealous of the TV guys because my business got disrupted so much earlier than theirs did. People have been waiting for television to be disrupted in a very serious way for a very long time. But there are many elements of the interwoven relationships in the television business that have prevented it from being truly disrupted. This year feels like we got a little bit closer to having that happen. You have the new Apple TV debut, which has an app store, so anyone can now build an app that will show a video on an Apple TV. Netflix and Amazon Prime both continued their really remarkable growth. Chromecast and Roku came out with new products that were well received. It really seems like it's just a matter of time of waiting for today's young people, many of whom who have never had a cable subscription of their own, the cord nevers as opposed to the cord cutters, to grow into being a larger portion of the population. Just yesterday it was reported the NFL now wants to sell streaming rights to Thursday Night Football. If you've not watched anything about the television world over the last 5 years or so, it's been that live sports is the one area that networks are willing to spend an enormous amount of money on, because their belief is that live sports are the only thing that people will say, okay, I'll get cable because I want to see the NFL on at a certain time. They're keeping it away from the online streaming audience. If they're willing to sell that to Yahoo or Apple or Google, we might see a really rapid transformation in the very near future. And again, what's the role of local news in this world? Whatever you think of local television news, it is the most common source of news for Americans. 46% of Americans get news from local television news, which is a higher number than newspapers, is a higher number than the internet, it's a higher number than anything else. Local television news works because there are local television stations. That's the only reason why it makes sense to have local television news. If you're in a context where you're getting all of your television content is delivered digitally over a box like an Apple TV, what's local news what's going to happen to it? I think that's a very open question, and it's unclear. On the slightly happier note, Podcasts, big year. It was right about this time last year that we conclusively figured out that Adnan Syed had not killed. But we finally figured it out in episode 12, What We Know, which was not really what we knew. But even though Serial took essentially a year off from producing new episodes, from distributing new issues, so they were presumably working during that time, the podcast boom that Serial was sort of the avatar of really continued apace in 2015 and shows no real sign of slowing down. You had companies like Gimlet and others that invested in building professional podcast networks with a very high quality that achieved really substantial audience, that were able to charge outrageously good advertising rates. Good for Gimlet, not good for advertisers, maybe good for advertisers. Midroll, one of the largest podcasting companies, was bought by EW Scripps, the old newspaper and television, then television and digital company. WNYC announced that it was going to be spending $15 million to invest in WNYC Studios, a new podcast development wing of the organization. It's really become a much more normalized part of media consumption in a kind of remarkable way. Why is podcasting doing so well? Well, it avoids a lot of the problems that happen in other parts of digital media. We were just talking about ad blockers and all the trouble that display advertising online has there at the moment. There are tons of them. Podcast advertising works really well. It's native advertising. It's usually voiced by the host of the show. It's ingrained in an audio file that you start and play until the finish. People tend not to skip ads in podcasts. They tend to be quite effective. If you're a publisher, a podcast is a very direct relationship with your customer. You're not having to rely on the Facebook news feed's algorithm deciding to show someone a piece of your content. They've subscribed to it. They're having every piece delivered to you. That's very powerful. That subscription basis is a very interesting counterpoint to the way that the rest of digital media is going. This was also the year of the Apple Watch and wearables. I'm just curious, who has an Apple Watch here? Who has any other sort of smartwatch? All right. Business is booming. I got one right there. Apple has, of course, said they will never, ever announce how many Apple Watches they have sold, which is just as Amazon has said they will never tell how many Kindles they have sold. It's kind of interesting when a company just decides, I will never tell you anything. These are eternal secrets. The estimates, which are unreliable, say that generally say around 10 to 12 million Apple Watches have been sold this year, and they do seem to be, by a wide margin, the largest seller in the market. I've been wearing an Apple Watch since it appeared. I was not a watch wearer before, and I, like most Apple Watches, are satisfied with it. It has very high customer satisfaction ratings. It is really good at notifications for news. My wrist buzzes when something happens. Unfortunately, because of my work, more than anything else, I have 1,000 news apps installed on my phone, so my wrist often buzzes many times when news happens. Generally speaking, though, the apps on the Apple Watch have been a flop. No one seems to use them or like them because no one wants to fiddle around with their wrist for 10 minutes. But there's one of the questions that some people have been exploring is how are you ever going to make money off this? If you're a publisher, what's the use of investing in the Apple Watch? The old saying is you went from print dollars to digital dimes. Have you heard that saying before? And then you go from digital dimes to mobile pennies, right? So I think we have to revive the mill or the half penny or something for whatever wearables is, whatever that next step is. Just dust, I think, would be the monetization. What watches have done is they've shown, however, how far we still have to go with notifications. If there's anything powerful about the mobile platform, it's the ability to interrupt you, right? That's an incredibly powerful tool. And some publications and outlets have made some interesting efforts. Facebook Notify debuted this year, which is a news-oriented app that's just about notifications. It's just so-so performer, I think. Some publications have allowed a little bit better customization of what kind of alerts that you want. But in general, there hasn't been as much advancement as I and others would like. My phone should be able to know that interrupting me at work is a different bar than interrupting me at 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, right? It should be able to know what is the right moment to send me the right thing. And thus far, the technology on that has not been very advanced. Buying innovation was another trend this year. If you can't innovate on your own, feel free to buy innovation. We saw a number of companies large companies, well-capitalized companies snapping up younger, more digitally oriented outlets. The Financial Times is, of course, not a new outlet by any means, but it's one that has had a real digital success story. And Nikkei, the Japanese company, bought it for $1.3 billion this year. Axel Springer, the German company, spent $450 million to buy Business Insider. You may have seen in the last week or so, it was reported that Atlantic Media is now listening to offers to sell Quartz. It's a very successful business-oriented startup. We talked about Scripps buying Midroll, the podcast company, earlier. There are a lot of companies that have a long media history and still have capital for acquisitions. And this was a year in which they started looking around for more digitally savvy, more digitally stable organizations to buy. The sort of flip side to that is we're also seeing more consolidation in the digital space. You may remember Recode, the site started by Walt Mossberg and other folks from the Wall Street Journal. High quality site with great reporting, a lot of talent there. Sold to Vox Media this year because essentially they couldn't figure out how to make a sustainable business out of something that was relatively small and targeted. This was a year when a lot of people realized how difficult it is to monetize a digital site without really remarkable scale. If the relationships with technology companies like Facebook and Apple are going to be really important to your success or your failure, you need size and scale to be able to engage in those conversations, to have those relationships. I just think it's worth remembering the dream of the internet when folks like Doc Searles, who's here, and I were using the internet in the 1990s, and we were thinking, this is so wonderful, this is a great democratizing force. Everyone can publish their thoughts. Everyone who has a creative instinct can go and share and be part of this great global conversation. In reality, the whole democratization angle has sort of collapsed upon itself. It's really become size and scale and these giant technology companies, mostly between San Jose and San Francisco, who have managed to take an enormous chunk of what we, in our more hippie-ish days might have thought was going to be a different story. A new/old kind of owner. Can anyone name this man? Sheldon Adelson. Does anyone know why he's in the news today or this week? Oh, good, Jay. Good. A+, Jay. Or credit fail. I don't know how you grade here. Sheldon Adelson, I think that's technically his son-in-law, bought the Las Vegas Review-Journal, the largest newspaper in Nevada, which is a state that I hear is going to have an election sometime soon. It's by no means a new phenomenon for people to own media outlets for reasons that involve their own political interests. That's not a new story at all, but is nonetheless a story that was much more common in ownership patterns in Europe and Latin America and other parts of the world as opposed to the United States, at least in the latter part of the 20th century. The story of newspaper ownership in the 20th century was all about chains and corporations and Gannett coming in and sweeping up family-owned newspapers. For all the ills and pluses and minuses that come with that, it was an moment where it was about making enormous amounts of money, which is what newspapers then were really good at. Sheldon Adelson apparently paid about 3 times the market value of the Las Vegas paper to own it. We had a moment last year when we were talking about how interesting and on the whole good it was that billionaires like Jeff Bezos and John Henry and others were buying these newspapers, and I think the two of them have both been quite good stewards of their newspapers. But these companies are getting cheap enough that you don't have to have the best interest in heart, maybe, to buy one. Speaking of which, if there was one sort of media story this year that I think is kind of really fascinating, it's Donald Trump. How do we deal with him? Does he break the media? Is this what it is? I mean, Trump is, of course, a social media genius in his own way. You remember this year, Huffington Post deciding to put all their Trump stories in the entertainment section of the site? Well, that didn't work out quite so well. We saw Ben Smith, the editor of BuzzFeed, announcing in the past week that in a memo to staff, it's okay to call Trump a mendacious racist, but we have to maintain our neutrality in all other matters, but you can say that about Donald Trump. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch if he sticks around, what the next few months of the campaign look like. Jay's sitting on stage, which I think implies I need to speed up. So we'll, no, oh, okay. Very good. The sad status quo in local news. I'm from a small town in South Louisiana, so local news has a very near and dear place in my heart. I really wish I could tell you about all the amazing, new, wonderful, optimistic things happening in local news, but there really aren't a ton of them. Print advertising for newspapers, which has been dropping 8 to 10% a year for the last decade or so. Oh, a lot more a decade ago in the financial crisis, but it's continuing to drop. There's no real sign of it. It's stopping. More layoffs. There's been no particular progress in local digital startups. It's still very spotty. There are some wonderful online local digital startups, but you have to be lucky to live in one of the communities that have them. If you live in anywhere else, sorry. There are a few spots of interesting behavior. The Boston Globe decided that they were going to start charging $1 a day, less than $1 a day, $364 a year. They're very keen on it's less than $1 a day, but it's $1 a day, for a digital subscription. Now, if you subscribe to the New York Times online, you pay at the lowest rate about $15 a month. This is $30 a month. This is twice the price of the New York Times or the Boston Globe. What they found, interestingly, is that the retention rate for their digital subscribers has been better than they expected. What local newspaper or regional newspaper in America has more digital subscribers, paying subscribers than any other? The Boston Globe, the one that also charges the most money. They have over 60,000 paying digital subscribers. They start them out at a very cheap rate. After 3 months, they raise them to a slightly higher rate. Then after a year, $364. And they find that people who are engaged, who are using the product, don't mind. And they don't get a big drop off. So the Boston Globe, one newspaper, has almost as many paying digital subscribers as all the Tribune publishing newspapers combined, which includes the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Hartford Courant, the Orlando Sentinel, Baltimore Sun. So maybe this is a sign that if you have a quality product, as the Globe still does, that maybe people might be willing to pay for it. We used to, 10 years ago, or say 5 years ago, when people were talking about paywalls a lot, there was the idea that if you ran a financial publication like the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times, you could charge. If you ran a metro paper, you couldn't, or it was a lot harder. What's really happened in the last 5 years is that the gap between those audiences really shrunk, because the metro audiences have shrunk, but the remaining audience is better off, better educated, and more willing to pay. So maybe there's something there. There's something in the water in Canada. There's a lot of water in Canada. They have some Great Lakes, I hear. This started with La Presse, the Montreal French language daily, which a year or two ago started a tablet edition, which has been wildly successful, which is something that no one understands, like much about French Canada. But I say this as a French Canadian, but ancestrally. The Toronto Star, the Toronto Star, which is the largest newspaper in Canada, the biggest paper in Toronto, decided to license La Presse's platform and create this tablet product, which does anyone remember the Daily from 2010, 2011? It's basically the Daily. It's a very produced, I guess they would say beautiful. I don't know if I would agree with that. A big edition that you download once a day on your tablet. I got to say this: the Toronto Star hired over 70 people to construct this product every day. I got to say, it strikes me as a terrible idea. And the buzz that I'm hearing out of Toronto is that it is not really working out. But nonetheless, it's kind of at least interesting that they're betting on tablets, which again makes you think that it's 2010 again. At the same time, across Canada, in the middle of Canada, in Winnipeg Free Press is doing what a lot of people have always wanted to do, have always talked about doing, selling articles via micropayments. You can buy one article for 27 cents. 27 cents. How they came up with 27 cents, I'm not sure. And that's Canadian, so I don't know what the exchange rate is right now, but it's probably around 27 cents. With Blendel's success in the Netherlands, we're having an interesting revival of micropayments as an idea. So we'll see how that develops. I will run quickly through these last ones. The Washington Post has had a really glorious year. They passed the New York Times in unique visitors, monthly unique visitors. They bragged about it a lot. They annoyed a lot of Times people about it, leading to some of the lowest stakes Twitter wars that you've seen. But under Bezos, the Post has really advanced in a lot of ways, not just in traffic. I mean, they have engineers integrated into the newsroom in a really remarkable way. They've made great strides in new product development, both in editorial and in apps. They've got this connection with Amazon Prime. I think they know a guy at Amazon, I'm not sure. It's interesting that their model is not what the Times is doing. The Times celebrated 1 million digital paying subscribers this year, which is a wonderful goal and a wonderful success. The Washington Post, rumor has it, although they, because they're owned by Jeff Bezos, have said they will never report how many digital subscribers they have. Somewhere around 60,000, that's the number I hear. They're sort of not betting on readers paying, they're betting on scale. It's a really interesting strategy. Whatever you think of it, I think it's great to have another great, ambitious national news organization. It's not like we have too many of them. We could always use one more. Some things we said goodbye to this past year. Andrew Sullivan retired from blogging. Felt like a real end of an era. You can, of course, see the DNA of blogs in lots of places in online publishing. There's, I think, a very good argument that blogging just won as opposed to disappearing. But nonetheless, it did feel like a moment. Paulo Troops. I just like saying Paulo Troops. Paulo Troops was a project that started in the Netherlands and it was sponsored in the United States by the Sunlight Foundation that would track politicians on Twitter and see when they deleted tweets. You can imagine the circumstances in which that might be interesting. When a politician tweets something and says, "Oh, I should not have said that at all." Twitter this year shut them down after several years of operation. We were talking earlier about all the new power that these platforms have, these tech companies. This is a real case of them using it as editorial power. Really terrible decision by Twitter to kill this thing that was actually serving a real democratic and journalistic purpose. We lost Chinua Achebe, the great African novelist, Nigerian novelist. Actually, we didn't lose him this year. We lost him 2 years ago. But what was interesting was in March, all of Twitter decided he had died again. So everyone on March 23rd, 2015, which was the 2-year anniversary of his actual death in 2013, the Twitter was just overwhelmed by people saying, "Oh, we lost the great man." There was another boomlet in November, interestingly. There wasn't even a good anniversary reason for it. I just like mentioning this because it's interesting in a way that shows how social media is unstuck in time. Things pop up when you least expect them. Quartz has one article that was published in September of 2014, How American Parenting is Killing the American Marriage. I'm willing to bet this article did well for them. Because I noticed that Quartz was actually retweeting it like a year later, every 12 hours, sending it out over and over again. And what I noticed from tracking this over a period of time is that every time they tweeted it out, it got basically the same number of faves and retweets. Excuse me, likes and retweets. Another terrible thing that happened this year. Facebook Notify, the new app, they send it out as a push notification. They buzzed on my wrist to tell me there's about this thing they had published 14 months ago. Just a very different calculus from publishing one edition a day or having one broadcast a day. Circa, shut down. The one Circa user is here, apparently. The 2 Circa users. One of the great questions of the last few years has been, can we find a new news-oriented app experience on a phone? We know that people get news on social platforms that are also about other things, but is there something you can create that's a great user experience that is just dedicated to news? And Circa was the best known attempt there. Never really connected with an audience. It did top out after refusing for years to say how many users they had. They finally reported they topped out at 300,000, which is not a great number for a free product. And ended up being sold a few months ago at a fire sale to Sinclair, the conservative local television company. That if you know them at all, you probably know them for airing the John Kerry Swift Boat documentary on all their stations the Sunday before the 2004 election. So Circa didn't work out. A few things that are on the rise. Slack. Who here uses Slack? Okay, that's right. This is a media crowd. Of course you all use Slack all the time. Slack is both interesting on its own and also interesting as an avatar of one thing that we discussed earlier, the rise of chat applications and closed environments for conversation. News organizations started building tools for it. The New York Times built a live blogging tool for covering debates. They built a tool that allowed audience development staffers to find out at any given moment what are the stories that could use a social media push most right now. They announced an app platform this past week, and I think it has still a lot of room to grow. Who here's played Cards Against Humanity? Didn't expect this slide, did you? I owe this to Mel Kramer, who wrote a piece about this in our predictions package yesterday, but she called them the most interesting media company today. I think there's a good argument for that. So for the Cards Against Humanity, it's a card game that you play at a party or something filled with lots of some vaguely antisocial ideas. But they are they are a company that sells a product that also gives it away for free online. Anyone can download it for free online. They have really unusual business strategies that work for them. This year they started the Chicago Podcast Cooperative, which was an attempt to create local podcast content in Chicago, building a studio, creating relationships with local advertisers and local podcasts, which has been a big success. They partnered with WBEZ to connect its customers for one of its products to give them 1-year memberships to the radio station so that they could put people into the public radio system. On Black Friday, they decided to have a sale, and the sale was that they were selling nothing. They had said, we would like to sell you nothing for $5. They raised $71,000 of people paying in $5 increments for nothing. In the past, they've done a lot of projects where they gave away money they had raised to a variety of very worthwhile charities. So a lot of people thought they were going to raise this money and then give it away to a charity. But then after Black Friday, they just posted, actually, we just kept the money. And they had all their employees list the things that they spent it on, including divorce lawyers and a variety of things. A really remarkable media company that's very much feels of this age. We are coming to a close. Second to last, light algorithmic reporting. One thing I've talked about in this session in the past is the idea of using bots and algorithms to handle reporting. You may have heard about QuakeBot, the LA Times bot that will automatically write a story when there's an earthquake, automatically accesses the U.S. Geological Service's data to write the stem of a story, and it can actually be published straight to the LA Times website with a byline by QuakeBot. The Associated Press is using algorithmic solutions to write financial quarterly earnings stories for companies, to cover baseball games, because a box score lays out everything you need to know about a baseball game. But it can also be used for lighter weight stuff. And one of my favorite uses was this story in the New York Times that I ran a few months ago. They actually had one this week that used the same idea. That while you're reading, when you first load the story, it automatically detects via your IP address where you are, and then changes the text of the story to customize it to where you are. I was in Middlesex County, Cambridge, Massachusetts. So that's our best guess for where you might be reading this article. The idea of using it in these very light ways to change prose, to do it in ways that really just help the traditional journalism process along, I think is very interesting. And finally, who's seen Spotlight? Did anybody not like it? I've heard only really good reviews for it. I am the only Boston journalist who has not yet seen it because I have that 1-year-old we saw earlier. On one hand, you can view Spotlight as a chance to recapture the glory days back when these sorts of investigations could be done way back in 2002. I hope that it goes beyond that, both in the sense that investigative reporting is expensive, but it's not so incredibly expensive that it can't be done. The Spotlight team, in the time this was made, this story came out in 2002, was 4 people. The Globe Spotlight team now is 6 people. It's even larger than it used to be. And in the grand scheme of a newsroom, 6 people is not a lot of people. I hope that it shows audiences the hole that exists in local investigative reporting. We have not found anything on the digital side to in any way supplant or replace the job that good local newspapers used to do. I'm hoping that people will see it after it wins its Oscar and get inspired with the idea that whatever your local media diet is, whatever your media diet is, to make sure there's room in there for good, high-quality local content, whatever the platform, whatever the source. I'm hoping at least that can be part of the lesson for the year. That's all I got. Thank you.
Josh, thank you so much. Jasmine is gonna hook up our final presentation here, but thanks so much to Josh Benton, who really gave us a master class in the future of journalism. I want to thank the parents of our graduates who are here, who supported our students so much. I want to thank the partners that we work with every year who host and sponsor our graduates. I want to thank the alumni who are here, which is so inspiring to me personally because they graduated years ago and now they're coming back to see their colleagues present their presentations. And Jasmine, if you'll start now. This is our website's presentation of the graduates of the programs and what they're doing now.
Quick sample.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Look, we thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your support of our program and our students. Let's give a round of applause to our graduates. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. We're adjourned.